In this video, I have a table which has the results from a survey in which people were asked a question and they had multiple answers. What I want to do is to go through each person and count the number of correct answers they had, and then give them 1 point for each correct answer and subtract 1 point for each wrong answer. I have a list which will act as my list of correct answers, which I need to compare their answers against the correct answers. The trick to this video is that you have multiple correct answers, meaning I can't simply ask, well, can I find the one correct answer inside of this text, which would be trivial. The first answer is borrowed from Rick de Groot, or the BI gorilla, who uses List.Transform, which I would consider a bit of a hack, but it is by far the best answer. I would consider this the Dart Monkey solution because it's good, it's fast, and it's easy to understand, but it's not exactly elegant. But without further ado, first I want to do some cleanup. Right now I have semicolons as separators, and I don't trust that I'll always have a separator at the end of my answers. I think I do, but I don't trust I always will. So first I want to remove any separator at the end of my text string, which I can do with table.transform columns. And when I want to use this function and manipulate it, I always like to have Power Query help me with the syntax, and then I manipulate that afterwards. So I go up and format it, and it doesn't actually matter what I do because I just want the code and then I can change it, because I think this is a bit cumbersome to write. So I do want to act upon this column, but I don't want to use the text.lower function. Instead I want to say that if the last character in my answer is a semicolon, then I want to delete it. So I'll just make some empty spaces, and then I can say that for each row in my table, if the last character is a semicolon, meaning if text.end of my current row, if that last character is equal to a separator, and I'll hardcode this as a semicolon, but you might want to make that variable, then I want to say if this condition is true, then I want to take everything to the left of the semicolon, meaning I want to take the length of the entire answer minus 1. So I'll say text start, again the underscore to grab the current answer, and the number of characters I want is then the text length of the current answer, the underscore, minus 1. And if this condition isn't met, which we see in the second row, then I want to output the underscore. Now I can guarantee that I don't have a separator at the end. I want this because I need the number of answers to determine how many were wrong, because the number of answers is then equal to the number of separators plus 1, which is easy to calculate. So I'll add a new column where I want to take my answer column and then remove everything that isn't the separator and then add 1. So I want to grab the text length of my answer column, but not the whole thing, only the part that is separators. So the text select of the underscore, well actually I can't do it on the underscore because the underscore refers to the entire row. I want to say my answer column, and the text I want to select is then the separator, and then I can say plus 1. And I need to mind my parentheses and add 1. And this seems to be correct because this row has a lot of answers and others have either 1 or 2. The way Rick de Groot's answer works is that instead of looking at the actual answer, it instead looks at the column with the correct answers. So what I want to do is to go through this list of answers and then manipulate the item inside of my list to be a 1 if I can find that answer inside of my answer column, and I want it to be a 0 if I can't find it. So in the first row I can find M&M because that's the first answer, but I can't find NF because the second answer is Tupac, which means this column will get a 1 and a 0, which will then equal 1, and that's what I want to be output. I want to add this in a new column because that makes it easier to look at, and I want to maintain my answer column so that it's easy to look at once the whole thing is done. I'll add a new column where I want to use List.Transform, and I want to transform my TBL answers column, which is actually a table, and I forgot what the column was called, so I need to start over. That was called best wrappers, so we'll take that. So List.Transform, I want to transform the list table answers, square brackets, best wrappers, which has a space in it, which means I need the hashtag quotation mark syntax. And actually, because I want to refer to this many times, I'll wrap it in list.buffer. And my transformation is that right now I have two contexts. I have the outer context or the outer loop, which is for each row I'm applying this transformation. And now that I'm inside List.Transform, I also have an inner context, which is the current item of the list. And I want to apply a function to each item inside of the list. And you can even see that in the help here, it has transform as function. So I want to take a function that takes the substring, which is just the current item, and that goes towards if text contains, and that goes towards, just as I did before, where where I wanted to remove the semicolon at the end. I want to ask a question. I want my substring to go towards, so I'm replacing the current item in the list with either a 1 or a 0. And if I can find the substring, my text, which is then the current row's answer column, which was called Who Are the Best Rappers. If I can find my substring, which is conveniently named substring, then this outputs a true, and in that case I want to output a 1, and otherwise I want it to be a 0. And this produces a list, because again it's taking this list, which is 2 items, and transforming that into a 1, because I can find Eminem, and a 0, because I can't find NF. I can't find Eminem, so I get a 0, and I can find NF, which gives a 1. The only problem with this solution is that if you have an alias like Slim Shady, then you can't find it. So you could make a more complicated version of this setup, which I have done, where you had aliases, but it's not really important right now. The last thing I want to do here is to change this from being a list into being a sum. And I don't want to do that inside this step because it's already a bit confusing to look at. So I want my user to be able to see what goes on here and have this column, which produces a list, as their helper. Meaning I once again want to transform my column, and I think in order to be able to use the format I need it to be a text, so I'll just manually write the function. So I want to transform my column, which is then a list of the column that I want to transform. Actually I needed to write what the table was. My table is my previous step, and then I want to transform one column only. I'll say that was called sum of correct answers. And my transformation is simply that for each row of my table, inside of this column, I want to use List.Sum on the current value upon the current row. And lastly, I want to transform this to be of type number. Now I have one correct answer and 0, 1, 0, 2, and so on. The last thing I need to do is I can take the number of... Actually, I do have one more thing to do. I need to change this to be total answers to make it easier to understand. I now have the number of total answers and I have the number of correct answers, and the number of wrong answers is then total answers minus correct, and then I can give the number of points. For the first row, I need to have 0 points because I have one correct answer and one wrong answer. For the second row, I have minus 1 point, and so on. Meaning the number of points is equal to the sum of correct answers minus, in parentheses, the number of total answers minus the sum of correct answers. And this is then type number. And you can decide whether you want to have negative numbers or if you want to round up. So you could say if the number is less than 0, you want it to be turned into 0. In this case, Kubeni has minus 7 points, which might be a bit unfair, but maybe she shouldn't give that many answers. So you could do that, which would then be another transform, saying that I want to change custom 1. Actually, that was called added custom 2. And I want to transform number of points to be where each, if the current answer is less than 1, I want it to be 0. Otherwise, I want to output the original value. But this is a decision you can do whether you want to compensate people who have a lot of wrong answers. In the next video, I'll turn this into a proper function which you can reuse. And then in the video after that, I'll show a more complicated solution using list_generate, which is what I would consider the super monkey answer. So you can choose whether you want that. I want to because I want to see how far I can push Power Query, but you might be satisfied with this. So